Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with author, speaker, consultant, podcast host, Dr. Almitra Berry. She is a seasoned and nationally recognized professional on the topic of culturally and linguistically diverse learners in America's K-12 education system. Her works and research focus on equity and academic achievement for marginalized learners, particularly in the majority of color, low wealth, large urban school districts. She's also the host of the podcast Education, Equity Emancipation, and she is the author of highly successful books. Enjoy her fascinating story.
Well, I really enjoy your story. I'm looking forward to getting into your life as an author and a speaker. You're a podcast host, a consultant. There's so many things that you're doing. But I want to begin with 4 years ago, we were looking at this pandemic and trying to figure out how long it was going to last, how it was going to ultimately affect us. And I'm curious, how did you survive that pandemic period, and how did it change the way that you do things now?
Well, I will tell you, sometimes I wonder how I survived it. We were fine health-wise and all of that, but my business, which had always been based in school systems, going out to systems, working with people there, really had to shift to completely virtual. And it was kind of scary. I built my reputation on personal relationships. That was how I got the majority of my business. And when schools had to shift to virtual, they weren't ready for it. And even though I had been using Zoom or WebEx or whatever for, years, I think I looked to see when GoToMeeting first came out, and I was on the front end of that working for a larger company. It was not comfortable for schools as a way to do business, and certainly not when it comes to professional development for teachers, to be engaged in professional learning when there was no accountability to being in the room for real. So it was just weird. But I always say God makes a way, so to speak, and business came my way that was a little bit different from what I was doing, and that's how I made it through. So I've shifted my business model a lot more to be more virtual, since it's become much more comfortable and convenient for places. It's not my favorite thing to do, but it's what we do. So we either change with the times or end up like the dinosaurs.
For sure. So let's get a complete handle right now in 2024 on what you do on a daily basis. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third grade students at Career Day. One of the kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
With a multitude of titles. I am an author, podcast host, consultant. And so what I do every day is I start my day actually with looking at the briefs, what's happening in education around the U.S. primarily, sometimes around the world. And then I am either developing content, writing my own books. I'm actually researching another book right now. Or I am providing instruction to educators on how to implement some best practices that are good for all children. Or I'm looking at textbooks that are written by companies like the books that the kids use in schools to make sure that in those books that every child can see themselves in a positive light. We call that an equitable approach to education and looking at representation. Or I'm developing content for a podcast or having a great conversation with someone who is either going to be on my podcast or, like today, talking to someone on their podcast. So my days are varied, but that makes it fun. It means that no 2 days are exactly alike. It's hard to get into a rut when things change every day.
So what did you want to be when you were in the third grade? What was your dream?
I was going to be a lawyer.
So did you pursue law at all?
I was a political science major in college. That's what I graduated with. I worked for the Attorney General's office. No, excuse me, not the attorney, the Lieutenant Governor's office my senior year in college. And what terrified me was that I was going to have to job hunt every 4 years when there was an election. I was on that path to going into law, and that just sort of made me think again, is this really what I want to do with the rest of my life, law and politics? So taking a step back and a little bit of a breather, I went home after graduation, and my mom said I could live at home for free, but I had to get a teaching credential. My mother was a lifetime educator. Now she's a retired School of Ed professor. And so I said, well, free, I take a test, I can live for free. So I took the test, passed, got a credential, and I put it in a file drawer and didn't look at it again for, about 10 years when, after having 2 kids, I just could not keep up the hours of a corporate it was never 9 to 5, but a corporate job that was very demanding. And so I dusted off that old credential and went into a classroom as a sub and just fell in love with teaching.
So who's been a hero? Who's been kind of an inspiration in your career?
Oh, there have been so many. I always say that if I have to pick a hero, it is Dr. Angela Davis, and more for how she stood for her principles, the work that she's done for women, for people of color, and a quote, something that she said that just has resonated with me and stuck with me, essentially, and it's actually, I sign off with a paraphrase, I sign off on my podcast, don't worry about the things you cannot change, change the things you can no longer accept. Those weren't her exact words, that's my paraphrase. But it's really about looking at the world around you and not saying, okay, well, this is it, I guess it's okay, and standing up and saying, no, this is not right. And what can I do to either make it right or to bring more light to it? So she's the one that I always look to, and it's just that one little guiding principle, that one little bit of information that really makes me look at what I'm doing every day, and am I doing the right things, or am I using my influence, such as it is, to make the world a better place for kids that are marginalized.
So if you could meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating and spend time with them, who would that be?
It would be her. I would love to just sit down and have a conversation with her about her life and all that she's done, the stuff that's been heralded and the things that she's been demonized for, just to get to know her. That's, if I could open a bottle of wine with somebody, that would be the one. She would be it.
So what is it that consistently has been a motivator for you to get up and to do the work that you do? You're very diversified. You're very driven. What is that continual motivation for you?
I get a little ticked off when things aren't right. I guess, I refer to the listeners on my podcast as equity warriors, the people who see things that are wrong and just won't tolerate it. And, when I first decided to podcast, that was my motivation, was to be able to say the things that are not always said about what is right for children and what is wrong with our education system. And so I get a little passionate. I get on my soapbox. I have since I was in the classroom. In fact, that's what caused me to leave the classroom, was I could not affect the change that I wanted where I was, so I had to move to a bigger place to do so. And that's been it. It's just seeing kids that are not receiving what they should receive, and somebody's got to stand up and say something about it. I guess that's me.
So in all of the work that you've done, what's been one of the best fan letters, best client responses you've ever gotten?
I wouldn't say it's a client response. It was actually a number of children that just, and so I've written about them, little anecdotes and snippets in my books, and I can see their faces still, some that were my students and some that were students in classrooms where I went in to coach teachers on how to teach reading. But every single one of them, there's a common thread, and that is that I created in them either a love of education or a love of reading, or let them know that they have the ability to learn, that there's nothing wrong with them. It's just been that no one has ever given them an approach that worked. If I can, I had a student in my 6th grade classroom, and my school was located just adjacent to a federal housing project. So all our kids were Title I, free and reduced lunch. And I had this kid whose mom was a prostitute, a drug addict, He was the only blonde-headed kid in my classroom. All our kids were, other than he and his siblings, they were all black and brown children. He was significantly delayed in terms of reading. He was about five years below grade level at the sixth grade. And, he went on off to junior high school or middle school and high school, and I'd left the classroom, so I wasn't seeing my kids. I traveled all the time for work. But a friend of mine who was the counselor called me and she said, and I don't want to use his real name, she said, he came here looking for you. And I said, is everything okay? Still, this was 6 years later. And she said, yeah, he graduated from high school. His mom died. He got custody of his younger siblings. And he wanted you to know that he joined the Army with rank because I had taught him to read and how to march. Marching was something we did in PE. But to think that this kid who had so much stacked against him would think to come back to me after all those years and say thank you is something that actually chokes me up every time I tell that story.
Wow, that's a phenomenal story. Yeah. So I'm curious too, on your show and in general, you're giving people great anecdotes and advice, so to speak. What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Oh, good question. I almost have to think about that one. Do better, maybe, is, do better. When you know better, do better. Maya Angelou told us, instructed us to do that. But I think that if I think of a theme, I don't know that there's ever been one person who said something to me directly that was the best advice, other than always trust your gut. About people, that I have a good gut instinct about folks, but I think just that recurrent theme of, do better, give back, do what's right.
So, of all of the things that you've done, achieved, and evolved into, what are you the proudest of?
I think the thing I'm proudest of is the one thing I thought I would never do, and that is to publish my first book. It was, and I even put that above completing my doctorate and the dissertation, which was, a painful labor, after which I said, I'm never going to write anything again. I'm never going to research anything again, but was approached to write a book based on a conference presentation I was giving about developing literacy for culturally and linguistically diverse learners. So I embarked again on this intense labor of love and research. But seeing my book seeing my book in Barnes & Noble, they're on the shelf. I'm a lover of books. I never thought that I would have a book in a bookstore, a book that is used to help develop other people. So now that I'm on my third one, it almost feels normal, but that would be the one thing that I am most proud of. It's a legacy.
Yeah, for sure. So let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into the 18-year-old version of you, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on the life you've led, the wisdom you gained. What advice would you impart on your young version?
I ask other people that question. I don't think about it much for me. I think I would tell my 18-year-old self to explore more widely. I grew up in what is now a medium to, actually they call it a large-sized city now, but it seemed to me to be a fairly small town. And growing up in this bubble, never leaving my little town in California, never getting outside of the state, I would tell my 18-year-old self, explore. Go to other states, visit other people, go to other countries, learn more than 2 languages, and find out how the rest of the world operates. Because I think when we grow up in any American city bubble, we are focused so intensely on ourselves and our own situations that we don't realize we are a teeny tiny part of this world. So that would be it. And, it's, I guess, something that I sometimes I don't really kick myself, but when in reflecting, the only I wish I had that comes up is I wish I had taken a risk when I was 18 as a freshman or sophomore in college and done an internship, either an internship abroad or an internship in DC, again, political science major, but just gotten out to explore and see what else was out there.
So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. You have all of your readers and listeners and clients, colleagues, but ultimately you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I would say I'm just a little brown-eyed girl from Stockton, California. I don't see myself as an influencer. I know that I have influence. I just want to be a person who is seen as someone who does right for people who don't have a voice, for children who don't have a voice. That's it.
Excellent. So I got to know, is there kind of a one-stop shop for people to get your books, to listen to your podcast, to reach out, hire you? What's the best avenue to go down? Anything but X. I'm on, that is so toxic a space. I'm not there at all anymore. I think my profile still is, but I don't even have a login, so we just don't go there. Primarily, people find me on LinkedIn. I do, have a website. The nice thing about having the name Almitra is that there are so very few of us. It makes it hard to hide and easy to find me. So if you Google my name, my website, podcast, books, everything's is gonna come up. Almitra, what an inspiration. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for taking time out, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to meet you as well.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.